War loomed in Western Europe when, in the year 1700, the childless Charles II of Spain died. Charles II was part of the Habsburg dynasty, a German royal house with its power base in modern-day Austria. The Habsburgs were famously the Holy Roman Emperors, a large, decentralized patchwork of states in Central Europe under Habsburg hegemony. With domains stretching from mountainous Transylvania to sunny Andalusia, the Habsburgs were one of the most powerful families in Europe. The Habsburgs maintained their grip on this wealth and power by practicing familial intermarriage and inbreeding so that their possessions would not fall under the control of foreign crowns and dynasties. However, this strategy had a significant downside, a limited gene pool. With each generation, the genetic material became more and more similar, leading to a higher likelihood of inherited disorders and health problems. In the case of Charles II, his parents were uncle and niece, doubling up on the family genes. Charles II had the unfortunate nickname of the Bewitched, as, because of the inbreeding, he was sick and weak for most of his life, leading to some believing that he had a curse placed on him. He was also infertile. No matter what he did, he would not have offspring, and thusly an heir to inherit the Spanish crowns and colonies. So, when he died on the 1st of November, 1700, nearly 39 years old, a problem arose for the Habsburgs. Before his death, Charles II had written wills detailing what would happen with his titles. European politics had other plans. Both the Bourbon family of France and the Habsburg family had claims to the Spanish thrones. In 1692, a new claimant to the Spanish throne arose. The young Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria was not from the Bourbons or the Habsburgs. This meant that the chances of Spain becoming part of either France or Austria were low. England and the Netherlands favored him as he didn't come across as threatening. Both the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold and the famed Sun King of France, Louis XIV, were willing to let their dynasty's claims be passed down to younger family members. Leopold supported his son, the Archduke of Austria, Charles. Louis supported his grandson Philip, the Duke of Anjou. As Charles II's death became more and more likely, the English, Dutch, and French signed the First Partition Treaty in 1698. This treaty guaranteed Joseph Ferdinand as the heir to the Spanish throne, but divided Spanish territories in Italy and the Low Countries between France and Austria. Spain, however, was not consulted. Out of spite, Charles II named Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria as the sole inheritor, nullifying the treaty. However, Joseph died at the tender age of 6 in 1699. Joseph's death revived the issue of the Spanish succession. Subsequently, England and France ratified the Second Partition Treaty in 1700, designating Archduke Charles as the heir to the Spanish throne. France would receive Spain's Italian territories. Again, Charles II countered this new partition treaty by willing the entire Spanish crown to Philip, the Duke of Anjou. If Philip were to inherit the Spanish domains, this would leave France in control of a large portion of Western Europe, also including significant parts of modern-day Italy. This would disrupt the balance of power in Europe. When Charles II died in the November of 1700, Louis was left with a difficult decision. If he accepted Charles II's latest will, he was faced with the possibility of war with Leopold, who might have the support of the English and Dutch. If he chose to accept the Second Partition Treaty instead, a Habsburg would ascend the Spanish thrones, and he would have to fight for what was promised to France. Louis ultimately accepted Charles II's will, putting Philip, now Philip V, as the sole ruler of all the Spanish domains. Starting in the March of 1701, French troops began to seize border forts in the Spanish Netherlands, in modern-day Belgium. The war between the Bourbons and the Habsburg Austrians began. The Duchy of Savoy, which geographically acted as a gateway between and surrounded by France and the new Bourbon domains in Italy, was forced to ally itself with the French. Prince Eugene of Savoy, however, remained loyal to the Austrians. The first battles of the war at Carpi and Chiari in Lombardy resulted in an Austrian victory under Eugene's leadership. William III, the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland since 1689, as well as the stadtholder of the Dutch Republic, looked to wage war against Louis, but failed to gain the support of his political elite. When Louis began to attack English and Dutch shipping, William garnered enough support to sign the Treaty of the Hague with Leopold in the September of 1701. This treaty recognized Philip V as the King of Spain, but would give Austria the Spanish territories in Italy and the Spanish Netherlands. Louis further antagonized William by recognizing James Francis Edward Stuart as the rightful English king. James was the son of the late James II, the Catholic King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, whom William had deposed in the Glorious Revolution of 1689. William now had grounds for war. By 1702, the war transformed from that of a limited conflict between the French and Austrians to that of a general European war. Much like the Savoyards, the Portuguese allied with the French as they too were surrounded and overpowered by the Bourbons. The French were also joined by the two Wittelsbach brothers, Maximilian II Emmanuel, Elector of Bavaria, and Joseph Clement, Elector of Cologne. The English, Dutch, and Austrians had the support of Frederick, the Elector of Brandenburg, and the Duke of Prussia, on one condition, that he'd be raised to the status of King of Prussia. By arguing that his Duchy of Prussia was outside of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick was able to circumnavigate the issue that no kingdoms could reside in the empire. Combined with the support of several minor German states, this grand alliance proved to be a formidable match. The Austrians continued to score victories in northern Italy as Prince Eugene defeated the French at the Battle of Cremona in the February of 1702. Despite facing a new French commander, the Duke of Vendôme, Eugene held his ground. The inconclusive Battle of Luzara in August ended Vendôme's offensive to secure the region for the year. At the same time, the famed English commander John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, led forces in the Low Countries, capturing key strongholds like Liège. An English admiral, Sir George Rooke, had a major naval victory at the Battle of Vigo Bay in October, sinking the Spanish treasure fleet and taking tons of silver. An imperial offensive into French Alsace was cut short when Maximilian and the Electorate of Bavaria joined the French, lured by the promise of emperorship. By capturing the city of Ulm, the imperial troops were forced to retreat. Claude Louis Hector, the Duke of Villars, pursued the retreat and achieved victory at the Battle of Friedlingen. In 1703, the French and Bavarians joined up to mount an offensive on the imperial capital city of Vienna. Yet Maximilian's hesitation doomed the attack to failure. In frustration, Claude Louis Hector was called back to Paris. By the end of 1703, France faced setbacks as Portugal and Savoy switched sides. A successful English blockade of the French fleet at Toulon convinced the Portuguese to flip. The draw at Luzara resulted in Savoy declaring war on the French in October. Still, the French and Bavarian threat to Vienna was significant and dangerous. Again, the two began to mount a new offensive on the city, with the Grand Alliance seemingly powerless in patching together a plentiful and coordinated force to counter it. A wealthy Hungarian aristocrat, Ferenc Rákóczi II, launched a full-scale uprising in Hungary starting in the May of 1703, tying up valuable Austrian troops that could be used to defend Vienna. At this critical juncture, Marlborough displayed his strategic brilliance and swift troop movement. He understood the need to ensure that the Dutch were protected while relieving Vienna. To achieve Dutch compliance, he pretended to threaten the French army under the Duke of Villeroy along the Moselle River, but instead crossed the Meuse and the Rhine by May. Marlborough's campaign was a bold move. He and a total of 55,000 troops would be marching some 450 kilometers, far from safe supply hubs, to attack the French and Bavarians near Vienna. Nonetheless, he was committed. Collaborative planning occurred during Marlborough's march. resulting in Eugene containing a French army on the lower Rhine, while Marlborough targeted French forces on the Danube. Marlborough forced the enemy to retreat south along the Lech River, placing his army between the enemy and Vienna. By August 6th, the Franco-Bavarian army grew to a size of 60,000. With the French and the Bavarians now combined into a single, cohesive army, Marlborough decided it was time to strike. Both he and Eugene faced a strong French position with the Danube on the right and forested hills on the left, protected by the small Nebel River. In the early morning hours of August 13, 1704, the Allied army began to move. The French, unaware of the impending attack, remained tranquil in their camps behind the Nebel. However, French pickets noticed activity in the Allied camp. As the alarm spread, the French camps began to buzz with activity. Marlborough's plan involved a risky crossing of the Nebel River, which was completed with careful coordination between infantry and cavalry. The French bombarded the Allied troops as they crossed, but the soldiers pressed on. One major objective was the small, fortified village of Blenheim. Heavy assaults on the village faced intense resistance by French reinforcements. The English suffered heavy casualties but managed to gain a foothold. Attacks on the neighboring villages of Lutzingen and Oberglau by Eugene's men forced the French to use up valuable infantry from the center. As the battle progressed, Marlborough successfully crossed the Nebel and began advancing toward the French center. The French cavalry fought valiantly, but the lack of supporting infantry and disciplined Allied troops led to the collapse of the French center. The Battle of Blenheim became a decisive Allied victory. The French suffered heavy losses, with around 6,000 dead, 7,000 wounded, and a whopping 18,000 captured. The Allies lost about 4,500 soldiers and had 7,500 wounded. Blenheim's effects were profound. Vienna was saved, the Grand Alliance preserved, and the myth of French invincibility dispelled. Also in August, Spain became a more involved theater of the war. With Portugal now part of the Grand Alliance, England and the Dutch had a solid foothold in which to invade Spain. An attempt to do so by English ships and Archduke Charles was unsuccessful, and Sir George Rooke instead turned his fleet towards Toulon, expecting the Savoyards to help. When that attempt fell through, Rooke sailed back to England, but not before taking the small peninsula of Gibraltar in southern Iberia on August 4th. Gibraltar acts as a vital and strategic gateway to and from the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Control of Gibraltar meant a significant degree of naval supremacy. A French attempt to retake the peninsula ended in defeat at the Battle of Malaga on August 24th, which gave England command of the Mediterranean for the rest of the war. A renewed Portuguese offensive into Spain was successful in capturing parts of its southwest. The capture of the city of Barcelona by English ships in the October of 1705 gave way to the Crown of Aragon, with the regions of Catalonia and Valencia in modern-day eastern Spain to openly declare support for the Habsburg candidate to the Spanish crown, Archduke Charles. Spain itself was divided. For much of 1705, the war was a stalemate. Marlborough initially planned an attack against France from the Rhine, but supply issues and lack of transport support led to a change in plans. The death of Holy Roman Emperor Leopold redirected imperial forces for a new emperor's election. In Italy, Eugene pushed French forces back, relieving pressure on the city of Turin. The war took a turn against France the year after, as Marlborough aimed to join forces with Eugene in Italy. However, due to various factors, the plan didn't fully materialize. Subsidies enabled the emperor to raise troops, and Eugene's rapid movements led to a decisive victory at Turin. In the Spanish Netherlands, Marlborough's victory at Ramillies on May 23, 1706, was significant. Marlborough was able to put much of the region under Allied control. The battle crippled French forces on the Rhine, as they now had to reinforce the French army in the north. The defeat led to Louis seeking peace, proposing Spain and Spanish America for Archduke Charles, while Philip retained Spain's Italian territories. However, terms involving the partition of the Spanish Empire were rejected, as British politicians declared no peace without Spain. Quarreling between Archduke Charles, now residing in Catalonia, and the Allied commander, the Earl of Galway, resulted in a dwindling army in Spain. Galway was defeated by a Bourbon army at the Battle of Almansa in early 1707, resulting in the loss of Aragon, Valencia, and Murcia. Catalonia was forced into a defensive stance. Even then, Louis still sought peace despite these events. After the scuttling of the French fleet at Toulon, the conflict in Italy concluded with the Convention of Milan, where France withdrew its troops. Between 1708 and 09, the Allied successes continued. Eugene joined Marlborough in the Spanish Netherlands, defeating the French at Oudenarde in the summer of 1708 and besieging the city of Lille. The fall of Lille in October forced the French out of Spanish territories in West Flanders. Louis once again considered peace terms. When he rejected Allied counteroffers, the war resumed. Louis used the lull in hostilities following the fall of Lille to raise a new army under the command of the Duke of Villars. Marlborough planned to attack along the French coast with the support of the English fleet, but this was considered too unconventional by his allies and not approved. Instead, he besieged Tournai and later faced Villars' forces at the small village of Malplaquet, near Mons. Marlborough wanted an immediate battle, but it was rejected, giving Villars time to fortify his position near the heavily forested Sars Woods. On September 11, 1709, Marlborough and Eugene commenced their assault. The Allied right flank faced difficulty as the underbrush and trees of the woods disrupted their formations, and the French defenders used their muskets and cannons to repel the attack. During this time, Eugene was wounded in the neck but refused to leave the field. Coordinated assaults on the French positions also resulted in heavy fighting. Near suicidal charges by Dutch troops resulted in the loss of 5,000 troops in the span of half an hour. The French gained momentum and launched a counteroffensive against the weakened Allied troops, threatening a potential victory. However, hesitation led to a missed crucial opportunity. By the late afternoon, the French completed their retreat. The Allied forces were too exhausted to begin a pursuit. At the end of the anarchic chaos, thousands of wounded lay on the ground, suffering tormenting pain and thirst. Dutch, Swiss, German, and Scottish corpses lay twisted and eviscerated. Malplaquet holds the distinction of being the bloodiest battle of the entire 18th century. The Allies suffered 25,000 casualties. The French suffered much less, losing 12,000 men. Malplaquet was a strategic victory for the Allies, but a Pyrrhic one. It saved France from invasion, restored the honor of the French army, and stabilized Louis's throne. However, in England, now known as the Kingdom of Great Britain, starting in 1707, it had the opposite effect. The country became war-weary and exhausted. The battle served as a catalyst for the anti-war Tories to rise to power in Parliament. Marlborough was dismissed in 1711, despite his best efforts to save face, and Britain largely withdrew from the conflict. The burden of war exhaustion was not exclusive to Britain either. The Dutch were less interested than ever in prosecuting the war. In the October of 1709, they signed the first barrier treaty with Britain, which guaranteed the Dutch the right to garrison 9 towns in the Spanish Netherlands. British statesmen started to consider allowing Philip V to retain parts of the Spanish possessions. However, Emperor Joseph vehemently opposed any partition of the Spanish Empire. Peace negotiations were held in Geertruidenberg in 1710 between representatives of Louis and the Dutch. The negotiations broke down in July due to disagreements, and the situation was further complicated by Emperor Joseph's death without a male heir in early 1711. The throne of the Holy Roman Empire now passed to Archduke Charles, the Habsburg candidate for the Spanish thrones. This made fighting the war for Spanish control less appealing. Peace discussions formally began in Utrecht in the January of 1712. After some deaths in the Bourbon family, which ultimately resulted in Philip V becoming the heir to the throne of France. Philip V renounced his claim to the French throne after British pressure. On April 11, 1713, France made peace treaties at Utrecht with Britain, the Dutch, Prussia, Portugal, and Savoy. The Treaty of the Hague was solidified, handing over the Spanish Netherlands and all of Spain's Italian territories to Austria. Philip V was recognized as the King of Spain. In North America, France ceded territories like Acadia, now known as Nova Scotia, to Britain, as well as recognizing Britain's sovereignty over the island of Newfoundland, as well as Rupert's Land surrounding Hudson Bay. Spain's peace treaties were signed a few months later. The Treaty of Utrecht in July saw Spain ceding Gibraltar and Minorca to England and promising Sicily to Savoy. Commercial treaties were also established, such as the British being given the exclusive right to seemingly monopolistic slave trading in Spanish America for 30 years. Though the Bourbon dynasty left the war with another kin on the throne of another power, French hegemony ultimately began to break. Many of the future conflicts to come about in the 18th century saw France and Britain try to check each other, both in Europe and America. French power slowly withered away as the government became more disconnected from the people. Alongside this, Britain's newfound trading rights allowed its economy to prosper for the next century. Strategic regions that they acquired during the war, like Gibraltar, Minorca, and Nova Scotia, allowed Britain to begin a quest for global hegemony. One economy that didn't prosper was Spain's. The loss of the rich Low Countries and Italian territories, combined with an already faltering economy, led to Spain's decline to a second-rate power in Europe. Though Spain lost territory in Europe, it retained its overseas empire. The rise of the Bourbon dynasty brought modern governance concepts from France, briefly rejuvenating Spain's power. While Spain never regained its former dominance, it centralized under King Philip's rule. Philip issued the Decretos de Nueva Planta, following the centralizing approach of the Bourbons in France, ending the political autonomy of the Spanish kingdoms like the Crown of Aragon, who had supported the Habsburgs during the war. The war also severely weakened the Dutch. High debts burdened them, allowing Britain to take over their trade opportunities in Africa, North America, and India. The Dutch, once influential in Europe, suffered a decline in maritime empire and trading prowess. By the war's end in 1713, over 400,000 soldiers from both sides perished. This number nearly doubles to 700,000 when the death toll also includes casualties from disease. Also one man can inherit a throne.